Okay, it's now time for our second speaker, Alvaro Chang-Arana from the University of Aalto in Finland. Please.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone, and thank you for your interest in my talk. This is an attempt to try to understand music transposition using the techniques from psychology, and this was done with my supervisor, Geoff from the University of Jyväskylä. So I will start directly by defining the core concepts of my study, which are inhibitory control and transposition. To define inhibitory control, I will ask you please all to collaborate with the group activity. I will show you a set of instructions and please follow them along. All right, so here we go. Name aloud the colors, ignoring the text. Please do it as fast and accurately as possible. Okay, ready? Go. Okay. Now I will show you another set of instructions. Also, please follow them. Name aloud the colors, ignoring the text. Please do it as fast and accurately as possible. Ready? Okay, very good. So inhibitory control is the cognitive function which allows us to stop ourselves from doing something automatic, which can be read a word, and instead of that, do something else which is required. So naming the name of a color. I will now define music transposition using another example, which I believe could help, but might not be perfect, but let's see. So imagine that I give you a set of numbers, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I tell you that 1, 2, 3, and 4 are equal to themselves. So every time you see a 1, you have to think of a 1, and so on and so forth. But now imagine that I tell you that 1, 2, 3, and 4 are no longer equal to themselves, but to 3, 4, 5, and 6. So every time you see a 1, you actually have to think about a 3. So we believe music transposition works in a similar way. Sometimes in music, what is printed in the score has to be transposed or moved to a different interval so that what we actually hear is different from what it's written. Having defined the core concepts, I will now go to the literature background. So inhibitory control, among other executive functions, has been used before to study musicians and how they differ from other populations. However, to the best of our knowledge, no one has checked up on transposition, a very specific musical ability. Therefore, the research question that we propose is, are there differences in inhibitory control performance among transposing musicians, non-transposing musicians, and non-musicians? The problem with this question, which one of the conference reviewer raised, is that how can we tell apart who's a transposing musician from a non-transposing musician? Where can we draw the line? So here we propose a different kind of question, which I think addresses this observation. The background that I just explained remains the same, but the question changes. So instead of asking this, we will ask something different, which is, do existing transposition skills impact upon inhibitory control task performance? To answer this question, I will explain the procedure we followed. Participants fill in an initial questionnaire, out of which we determine whether they were musicians or non-musicians. Non-musicians move directly towards the inhibitory control tasks that were the classic Stroop tasks and music Stroop tasks that I will briefly explain in the future. But musicians went first through a transposition task. This presentation is based only on this specific part of the whole process and what we learned out of this. So how did we measure musicians' transposition task? We designed a task that had a training session and a playing session. I will now show you the exact instructions that they saw so that you can have like a first-hand experience of how this looked like. Training session. So a musician will come with their own instruments and they will be audio recorded while being in front of the computer, and they will read these instructions. Please play the following 5 notes as written. Before the notes are presented, you will hear a short noise. Do not worry about it. Play as soon as you see the note and as accurately as possible. Sorry for the typo. When you feel ready, press any key to continue. At that point, the person will press a key, a white noise will be presented that lasted for 50 milliseconds, and then one note will be presented, and they had to play it as fast as they see it. Now, the transposed training condition was exactly the same, except that it asked them to play the following 5 notes a minor third higher than written. Then they had this note, and then an instruction below reminding them of the task. The playing session is just an extension of this training session, in which we have 5 sets of conditions in which they have to play the following 5 notes as written, and then 5 sets of conditions in which they have to play the following 5 notes towards a different interval, not only major third as is on the screen. And then they will be only show 1 note like this. We use MRI toolbox to extract the note onset, and what we were interested in is in the time delay between the onsets of the white noise, so this one, and so the peak that you see on this white noise, and then the peak in the note signal. So finally, the transposition level was defined as the difference in delay time between. So transposition level was defined as the difference in delay time between the transposing conditions and the non-transposing conditions. And how did we measure inhibitory control? Unfortunately, I don't have time to go into details about this, but I will explain you the overall design of the Stroop task that we use for this. So the classic Stroop task had a training session and an experimental session in which both had congruent and incongruent stimuli. As a matter of fact, the task that I showed you at the beginning is a Stroop task, so you can have kind of an idea of what participants had to do, although it was a bit different from what they actually did, from what you did. And now we also designed a Stroop task per each mother tongue of every participant that we had in the study, so that we could have like a very familiar stimuli for every one of them. The music Stroop task, on the other hand, was a design followed very closely from Grégoire Perruchet and Poulin-Charonat, among others that have in the past done some music Stroop tasks. And it had a parallel structure as the classic Stroop task, where we had a training session and experimental sessions. And then we also took into account the musical background of every participant. So we had the 3 possible note naming systems, so Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Si, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, or the German, which is instead of B, you have H. And we also had the most common clefs in which musicians has to play. So we accounted for all possible combinations so that everyone will be familiar with the task. Having said all of this, do existing transposition skills impact upon inhibitory control task performance? To answer this question, we raised 3 hypotheses. First of all, musicians with higher transposition skills will outperform musicians with lower transposition skills in the music Stroop task. Second, musicians with higher transposition skills will outperform musicians with lower transposition skills in the classic Stroop task. And finally, musicians with higher transposition skills will outperform musicians with lower transposition skills in global inhibitory control scores, which is a combination of the music Stroop task and the classic Stroop task scores. Although we found small effect sizes in the first 2 hypotheses, we did not find any significant results for any of the hypotheses, which is kind of unfortunate. However, what did we learn out of this experience? First of all, participants of all transposition levels performed similarly in the music or classic Stroop task, although small effect sizes were obtained. I wonder whether this is because of a conceptual misunderstanding, and perhaps inhibitory control has nothing to do with transposition. That could be one possibility. I would love to hear your opinions about this. Second, transposed trials took a longer time to be played than non-transposed trial, which is good. This means that the task that we designed seems to be working in the sense that it's measuring some transposition skills, although we did not use any other complementary measurements of transposition skills. So it would have been good for extra validity evidence to have some other standardized transposing tasks. Then I think this is anyway a good beginning for future studies in transposition, and I think like the biggest contribution that I can offer to you is perhaps some unconventional experiments or different ways of approaching this very specific musical task. And on that note, I would also like to say that it's we have still to explore a lot within music and the different skills that musicians have to use in their everyday life, and I think that transposition can be a next step into understanding better the mind of musicians. So thank you very much.
Alvaro, thank you so much for your great talk. Now we have time for some questions from Graz. Anyone here? Yes, please.
Hi, thank you very much for a lovely talk.
Thank you.
And the topic is really exciting. Just statistical matter. If you would want to say something about a null hypothesis, and you don't know if it's about size, it's about the set size that you have, it's only 30 musicians, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe use Bayesian analysis. It could confirm a null effect, and it could confirm if you have a problem, if you don't have enough subjects, so you can add subjects and then confirm that this is a null effect or not.
Okay, thank you for the suggestion. Indeed, having a good sample size was very challenging. Musicians weren't as collaborative as we expect them to be, so we couldn't have as much as we needed, but that approach could be very interesting to explore.
Yeah, so then you can really say this is not about the set size, this is about the effect.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your comment. We have another question right here.
Thank you, it's a great presentation and
Thanks.
work. I'm intrigued by the fact that for musicians, the actual act of transposing is not about a single pitch, but it's a state of mind, and then you are transposing entire melodies. And those tests with the colors and things like that are specific events that are like a single notes, single colors. And I wonder if those are different skills because of that.
Totally, it could be possible that my understanding of transposition is limited because my background is in psychology, so I haven't had like a composition background, so it's possible that I made that mistake. But it's interesting that you point out that we should see at a bigger scope of more contextual or stimuli maybe for next experiments.
Yeah, one other thing that from my own experience transposing, I know that a lot of people just think if you're using a staff, you just think, oh, I'm gonna think as if it was a different clef. So it becomes like this mechanism, like a shortcut that has nothing to do with inhibiting anything. It's just you pretend that it's a different clef. Yeah. There are many tricks, and I think like one possible research topic for anyone could be exploring in more a qualitative way, perhaps, the ways in which musicians transpose, because I've talked with some musicians and they all have very different ways of going through this very tricky task. So it will be very interesting to see what can we have. Thank you very much. Thank you.
That was an excellent point. I actually just want to add one thing. I think that also for musicians, transposing is actually something that has to do a lot with their own body, with their motor control. The idea of transposing, it's actually more very often strictly linked with their own action. So transposing is a way of doing things rather than perhaps just thinking of it. Now I'm thinking about a horn player. Every time he has to play, usually for orchestra, he always has to transpose. So it's always that perhaps it may be probably the part about conceptual interpretation of transposition. There is one missing part perhaps, that is the way in which transposition is an actual movement involving phenomenon. Maybe that could be also part of the thing. But do we have other questions? We still have time for some. Yes, please.
I was going to make a similar point, I think, to the one you've just made, but also point out that different instrument interfaces have different affordances with respect to transposition. And I know you varied the intervals and you had a few different instruments, but I wonder whether that might have affected your results as well.
Could you please rephrase the first part of your...
So on different instruments, some instruments are kind of easier to transpose on than others.
Right. Yeah, definitely. So I totally acknowledge this limitation. I knew that by asking musicians to bring their own instruments, I was introducing some chaos into the design because every instrument has different mechanics. But I also wanted to keep it as natural as possible for them. But that's a very valid point, and it's a limitation of the study as well. Thank you.
Still time for questions here in Graz. Okay, Alvaro, maybe you can add a few things, a few ideas about future possibilities for developing new tasks about your study.
well, to be honest, I haven't thought of new ways of going through these problems yet. But at the moment, we are working on some publications out of this. And hopefully in the future, in next conferences, I will show you the strip tasks that we use, because I think they're also quite interesting to be explained.
Okay, maybe we have some suggestion from the audience here in Graz about future possibilities, about applications in concrete musical contexts. Still a bit silence, right? Still early in the morning. Quite early. All right, well, then, thank you very much, Alvaro.
Thank
for
you.
your great talk, and
Thank
let's
you very
prepare
much.
for the next one. Thank you.